Morning. Welcome to the Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series. I'm Lawrence Geller, the founder of ForAdvisorsOnly.com. This is the 21st of what we expect to be a great many webinars with Canadians who've dedicated their careers to learning the art and science of insurance sales and service. Webinars in this series are now scheduled through the end of this year, and more are being added to the schedule daily. Over the years, I've observed that every successful insurance agent whom I've met has succeeded differently. Even if they're in the same field, deal with similar clients, and even if they are related or in business together. This is what makes the sale and servicing of insurance one of the best careers that I can imagine. It's possible to become a success in our business with diligence, integrity, and experience. With this webinar series, we intend to prove that any type of person can succeed with time and hard, thoughtful work. Our goal is to create a video record for each of these masters of insurance so that some of their expertise and experience will be available to anyone who'd like to learn from. Today, we have Mr. Abe Toews of Beyond Wealth Consulting Inc. with us. With over 40 years of experience in the financial services industry as an advisor, corporate manager, and business owner, Abe brings a broad range of experience to the planning table for his clients. Abe's experience as chair of the board and treasurer for Advance serves him well as he leads and participates in discussions. Abe's board governance and financial planning background allows him to provide advice on corporate reorganizations, employee benefit planning, asset maximization, tax planning, and project development. Abe works with Beyond Wealth Consulting, a fee-for-service advisory firm that specializes in providing creative advice to business owners, farmers, and self-employed professionals relating to business transition, risk and wealth management, employee benefits and pensions, and exit planning. As fee-for-service advisory firm, they work with the client's current professional advisors while providing overall project management. Abe holds an ICD from the Institute of Corporate Directors, the CLU from the Institute of Chartered Life Underwriters, a Chartered Health Specialist, CHS, and CHFC, both from the Institute of Chartered Life Underwriters, and a Certified Financial Planner designation from the CFP. He is very involved in his community, in the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, as a member of the Finance Committee, in the Living Hope Alliance Church, as past chair, as a member of the Property Development Committee of Wascana County Country Club, and the past president, as a member of the Carrying Place Board and the past chair, as the past president of the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, and as a member of the board of directors of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'll be interviewing him. And as I said, we have now booked interviews through the end of 2024. If you know anyone else who is a master of insurance who we should be speaking with, please don't hesitate to contact me. Good morning, Abe. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Lawrence. It's a pleasure to be here.
Abe, you've been in this business a long time and you've had a lot of roles, but tell me, how did you get started in the business?
Well, it was May 1st of 1981 in a small town of Morden, Manitoba. It was about 5,000 people, about an hour and a half southwest of Winnipeg. And I joined the traditional way. My brother introduced me to his manager at Mutual Life of Canada and thought I might, have a career in this industry. So I joined, and I wasn't overly enthused. I studied my life insurance license while I was watching the Stanley Cup on TV and managed to pass. And I said to the manager, and it's interesting, I had lunch with him just a few weeks ago, and I asked him if he remembered what I had said to him, and he said, I actually do. And I said to him, well, I'll try it till I find a decent job. And that was 43 years ago, so I'm still here.
Great. So you started in Morden, Manitoba, and like Mr. Ben Feldman, you started in a very small town.
Yes.
How did you find your clients when you first started?
Well, I had actually been in radio sales, which was an interesting career. I determined after 10 months that wasn't going to be my future. But what it did is I called on all of the businesses in that region because they were all looking to buy radio advertising. So I had made a lot of very interesting contacts. And plus I also was the chair of the Morden Chamber of Commerce, and so we had a bit of a higher profile there because we actually saved the local community festival, the Corn and Apple Festival, and that put me in front of the media. So I had some exposure to the business owner clients in that region that turned out to be good contacts for me to have conversations with. So that profile really served me well.
So you really started in business insurance, not with a Project 100 the way the rest of us did.
Well, I did those as well, but my Project 100s were mostly business owners, but I was also introduced to that marketplace through a mentor that I had, one of the mutual life advisors who lived about an hour north of where I was. He took me under his wing, and every Thursday he would come to Morden and we would have breakfast together, and then I would go with him on his calls that day. And so he invited me to sit in with all of his calls, and he was in the business market. And so I had an amazing training from a mentor that I was very, very fortunate that he would take a rookie under his wing.
Well, that's excellent. And how long did that go on for?
That went on for a number of years. And in fact, after about 2 years, he said to me one day, we're going to the Banff school, the Abacus Banff school. I said, well, I can't afford that. He said, I don't care. You're coming with me. So he threw me in the back seat of the car, and we drove the 8 hours to Banff, and that was my first experience of that nature. And I've been back many years since. In fact, I'm going back this year again. I figured, well, maybe this old dog can learn a few things, but so I'm actually going back to Banff school this summer. And so that's what he did for me. He went well out of his way to introduce a new rookie to the industry.
Just as a promotion for the Advocates Banff School, one of the amazing things that I've always found about that school is that people load into cars and you get 4 or 5 agents in a car driving 8-10 hours to go to that school.
Yep.
And everyone who goes to it comes back re-energized and with ideas to help them.
Oh, absolutely. And I've been there half a dozen times over the years. And I've also been I was fortunate to go to the Atlantic School a couple of years to go to speak. And I've also spoken at the Okanagan School. So all of them are excellent learning for advisors of any seniority in the business. And you have somebody like George Segerson who just goes to all 3 every year. It's just crazy what he does. But I'm assuming that you either have or will be interviewing him. But it's scary, for that somebody at his vintage is still attending all those schools.
Well, that's because he gets to play golf with people at night.
Absolutely.
So here you are. How old were you when you started with this mentor?
About 30, give or take.
Here you are as a 30-year-old neophyte in the business with a good mentor.
Yep.
And a good roster of potential clients, and you're in the business market. What happened then?
Well, the first thing that happened to me was when with Mutual Life at the time, I had 2 documents on the table in front of me the day I started. One was my Mutual Life contract, and one was my Life Underwriters membership. And so what I had to do is as part of my first years, I had to go to Winnipeg every Friday morning, come rain, shine, or snow, for an 8 o'clock LUATC 1 and LUATC training class. And so that's for my first 2 years in the industry, is every Friday with a group of 10 or 15 advisors in Winnipeg. And so that was just a natural thing for me that I had to do. And I've sort of done it ever since. I mean, it's just something that you get into a habit of and you keep doing.
So at what point did you move from Morden? Because you've certainly moved around a little bit. And what happened to cause that move?
Well, true to my word that I was going to do it till I found a decent job, I actually had another job arranged. 1.5 years in, I was going out the door, and all of a sudden I realized, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So I committed back to it, and then as it was, within months of that, Mutual Life decided, in their wisdom or lack of wisdom, one or the other, that I should be promoted into management. And so I enrolled in the management program with Mutual Life, and I was in, in Kitchener-Waterloo for 2 weeks, and then home for 6, and there for 2 weeks. So I did that for a whole year. And at the end of that year, then they posted me in Brandon, Manitoba, as part of the Winnipeg agency to reopen the office in Morden, or pardon me, in Brandon, that they had had closed a few years ago. So they sent me back to Brandon to reopen the office. And so that's why I wound up leaving Morden. But one of my assignments during that training program was to replace myself in Morden with another advisor. And so that was part of my job, was to find someone. So I found someone that I thought would be an excellent candidate, but he was about 55 years old at the time and had just sold his business. And he used to be a town councillor, and he knew every person within 100 miles of Morden. But Mutual Life didn't want to hire him. So I had to make a case that this guy would actually be an excellent advisor. As it turned out, he was in the top 5 of rookies of the year for Mutual Life so in hindsight, he did very well. But then I moved my family over to Brandon and started working as the associate manager there, and reopened the office and grew it to about 15 people over the 5 years that I was there.
My recollection is the back of that time there was a school for Winnipeg, or for Manitoba, in Hess on Lake Winnipeg. Did you ever go to that? This is just a question out of the blue,
but I don't remember that.
Oh. Well, I mean, it was an excellent school, but one thing I remember is they had pterodactyl-sized mosquitoes.
Well, we could saddle them and ride them to work.
Now you're a manager. And
yes.
How many agents are you working with?
In Brandon, we grew it from there was a core of about 4 or 5 that were still there, left over from the old days. And I grew that to, over the 5 years, probably till, I would say, 10 to 12 that were active. There was a few that were closer to retirement than they were to starting. So, but I would say there was about a core of 10 or 12 that were in Brandon when I left.
That's a pretty good size for that community.
And some of them were very productive. Yeah, and so the office there did fairly well.
So during this time, you're formulating the way that you're going to manage for the rest of the career that you were in management. What management style did you follow? Did you lead from the beginning, from the front? Did you go out on calls with people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was quite active in working with the advisors, particularly the new advisors that I recruited, because it was part of our process at the time, is that we had to make a number of calls with the new advisors and show them sort of what was involved in doing a proper fact-finding interview and presentation, and so I learned some skills there that I think have stood me in good stead over the years. And but yeah, I was fairly active, still going out on some evening calls and things like that. So that was part of, and I quite enjoyed. Uh, I've always enjoyed seeing and playing a small part in helping people be successful. They are there to earn an income to feed their families. So it's very important to me.
So what do you think it took for a new agent to be successful in Brandon, Manitoba at the time?
Well, I mean, the training pieces are critical. I mean, we had at that time we had a pretty good training program, which we trained them locally at the office, and we had a number of things. And then back in those days, once you were in for a year or so, and you sort of proven that you have the abilities, then of course Mutual Life would bring him into the Kitchener-Waterloo head office for a week, and do some training there back in the days when companies were still training people. And so that was part of it, but it really was making sure that they had the fundamentals. And back when I started, we actually had to figure out from a paper rate book how to calculate an insurance premium. So I still have one of those old rate books. But so the fundamentals to me were always important. But then the important part of our business is really building relationships. And so if you had the ability to speak with people and to interact with them and find out what's important to them versus trying to sell stuff, those people in my mind were more successful. And that's over time. I mean, as you talk to people that you're talking to, the masters, as you call them, although I feel a little inferior to some of the people that you're talking to, but that's what's made them successful. It's not necessarily, I mean, all of them are good at the technical stuff, but that's not the important stuff. And I find in our business, the numbers are the easy part. It's the relationship building, and over time, we all have stories about, I just finished a fairly significant deal last year, but it's been a 15-year conversation. And I just met with this client not 2 weeks ago, and we spent 3 hours together, and we probably talked 20 minutes about business. The rest of it was about his family and his kids and what his vision was for his business and what he wanted to accomplish. I mean, my goal is just to help them accomplish it. So if you have younger advisors that get that early, that's really, I think, what makes them successful.
Okay, so it's about conversations, it's about the client. It's about getting the client to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you say to young agents at the time? Because we all have this tendency to want to tell the clients exactly how much we know. And details. Well, what did you tell them at the time about that?
Oh, that's hard to remember, but I mean, I know what I do now, but I really just wanted them to have a conversation. I mean, find out what's important to the person. I mean, we were basically selling insurance back then. I mean, we might have had a 5-year GIC or something, but that was about it. Oh, they'd be going to mutual funds later. But it really was about, what's important to you, what do you want to provide for your family, and how much can you afford, really. It was almost that simple. And then you figured out what kind of a policy they got. I mean, we saw it. I'm not sure what I would have said back then, but today, when I talk to a business owner, I said, say, tell me how you got into business. That's a 3-hour conversation for most. And then I say, okay, so if tax was not an issue, how would you like to get out? That's another 3-hour conversation. And so we probably had simpler versions of that back then, would be my guess. But I don't know, or don't remember the exact process we would have used.
You said that when you were in Morden, you were on the Chamber of Commerce, and that was instrumental in helping you to meet people. What
Yes.
happened when you moved to Brandon? What did you stay involved in charity and volunteer activities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was involved in the chamber there. I got involved while I was in Brandon, I got involved with the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, so a larger scope. But even in Brandon, I was involved locally. I was the chair of the Brandon Advocates chapter at the time as well, from an industry point of view. But I've always been involved. But the largest part of my involvement when I was in Brandon was to get involved in the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce. So it was a larger scope of what I had done in Morden. But I was very involved in the local community in Brandon, the local chamber, the local church, and other things that I worked with in Brandon. So I mean, for a young person, even today, to me, if you want to expand your business, volunteer for something. And so I've done that my whole career. And if you want to focus your expansion, volunteer either for the membership committee or the fundraising committee of an organization. Because if you're a member of the fundraising committee of an organization, you now have permission to talk to people about donating money. So you don't have to apologize for phoning them anymore. And if you do that properly, then if you run into a circumstance where you want to talk to them about your business, they already know you. So volunteer for membership or fundraising on an organization if you're looking to expand your business.
And this is about name recognition and being recognized, is it? Not about selling, not about finding clients, prospect.
It's actually, you want people to know that you're a human being. You're not an alien. And so when you approach somebody and say, I sell life insurance, well, you get interesting looks. Well, no, I'm here to talk to you about this particular charity that we both care about. And you have to limit I mean, they may ask who you are, what you do, and then you have the ability to I mean, if you have a compelling what this industry calls an elevator talk or a 2-minute introduction or something, but you don't lead with that. You lead with the fact, this charity needs our help, and I'm here to ask you for your support. Then you have, because they know you from that, you may get the opportunity to talk about what you do, and they may ask you, and then you have permission to say that. But I never lead with it.
Coincidentally, then you may find out how generous they are.
Absolutely.
Their attitude towards money.
Yeah.
What does it tell you about their attitude about employees or family?
Well, those are all critical attributes. I mean, if you can understand the individual, and if they happen to be a business owner, those are all critical pieces that will allow you to formulate maybe even your approach or your early discussion with them, is to determine, I mean, one of the things I ask business owners is why are you in business? And you get some very interesting replies. But that'll tell you a lot about what you may approach them with for solutions for some of the issues they're talking about. But it's critical information that you will need at some point. But if you can get that early on, it's just even more helpful.
Did you ever hear, well, I'm in business until I find a real job?
I've heard versions of that, yes. Some of them have, especially when you have G2 and G3 business owners. They inherited this thing and they really would like to get rid of it, but they don't know how to go about it. So in my job today, that's what I do mostly, is helping people understand how they can exit their business.
And you in the introduction, I said that you work with farmers as well. Are farmers just businesses, or is there something different about it?
Yes and no. They are absolutely businesses because they run multi-million dollar operations. I mean, to buy a combine today is close to $1 million, so it's not an inexpensive tool. And farmland is trading at $5,500 an acre. That's low for Ontario, but it's very high for Saskatchewan. And it gets difficult to make the numbers work. But yeah, they're absolutely large commercial operations. But a lot of them, if they are a family farm, and it's the third or fourth generation, they are different than just a regular commercial operation. But they're a combination of both. But I've had farmers sit at my boardroom table with a large check in their hands, weeping, because they're the generation that sold the family farm because the next generation didn't want it. And so it is different, but it's similar. A lot of the tax rules and all those things, all apply. There's some different rules for farms, but generally they're similar. But farming is also a lifestyle. It's not just a business. And so it gets to be a little different. So you have to really treat it as a more personal business, but it's still a business.
When did you start working with farmers?
Well, I grew up on the farm, so I mean, I grew up on a small farm in southern Manitoba, and so I've known farmers forever. But I mean, Morden is a farming community, so I had a lot of farmers as clients early on. I mean, I sold a lot of term insurance to farmers back in those days, but they're a unique breed to deal with. I mean, first of all, they're certain times of year they're very hard to pin down because they're always seeding or spraying or doing something. And I remember one file where the guy was looking, he needed some insurance, and he said, absolutely, I need insurance, but I'm not sure when I can see you. And I said, so after a number of these kind of discussions, I said, okay, where are you going to be on Friday at lunch? And I knew he was combining. And so I'll be in this field at this corner, and my wife is bringing out the lunch, and I'll be there. I said, okay, so will I. So I phoned the paramedical nurse, and I said, we have a lunch appointment on Friday. You're coming with me. And so we drove out to the field and did the application. Back then we still had paper applications that we could fill out. And the nurse did her thing and secured her samples that she needed, and in the middle of this field beside the combine. And you did those things, and I'm sure mean, all of the people that are on this all have different stories of the similar thing. But, I mean, I had the rule back then, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, anywhere, anytime. That was sort of the rule. And my wife was working, and, I took care of the kids in the morning to get them to school, and she took care of them after school, so that I was free to do what I needed to do. But so if that meant going to the field to sit beside a combine, I did. That's what I did. So we got his insurance placed.
It's not a lot of insurance at the beginning, term insurance at the beginning.
A lot of it, yeah.
How has your attitude towards term versus permanent changed over the years, if at all?
Well, I have never yet seen a death claim check that discriminated between term insurance versus permanent. It's $1 million no matter what you have. So my view always is, if the client can see themselves buying $1 million a term, I will sell it to them. Then we'll fix it later. And so I learned this from another mutual life advisor. I mean, he sold 150, 200 term policies every year. But after 5 years, all he did was he spent years and years converting all of it to something more permanent. So to me, there's no such a thing as a bad insurance policy.
As Joe Dixie said, the best policy is the one that's in effect.
Exactly. And so we got hung up on, trying to sell the best policy that we can. Well, yes, we need to do the job. But, my preference is, if we can get the term policy issued today, let's do that. Because then they're covered. And you want to sell them what they need, not what. I mean, if they can afford $1 million a term, then sell them $1 million a term. But I have the conversation that over time, you will need something different. But
How has your client's attitude towards term versus permanent changed over the years?
well, as we were dealing with more sophisticated business owners, and they have the structures of real estate in one company and an operating company and a family holding company, then it gets more complicated, and we need to, so it's really determined, what is the purpose of the insurance, and what do you want it to do for you over time. That changes the type of policy that you recommend. And my job really is to provide them with options. I mean, I try not to, if the option is, if you're trying to, soak up cash in a holding company, then you may go more, more permanent insurance. But if it's meant for, just for a buy sell for 10 years with a shareholders agreement, well, then we may just do term. But it's really the policy is determined by what do you need it for. I mean, there's no one solution that fixes all of it, in my mind.
So now we have you in Brandon,
Yes.
but you didn't stay in Brandon.
No.
What happened next?
Well, I was in Brandon for 5 years, and I was, I quite enjoyed it, but we had some changes happening within the company at the time, and I wasn't looking, but I got to know Jim Weiss, who was the manager for Great West Life in Winnipeg, because I had been attending management training over the years, and they had driven to Winnipeg for that. And one day he called and says, I'm coming to Winnipeg, coming to Brandon because they had an office there as well. And I was coming to Brandon, and I'd like to buy you lunch. And like the saying goes, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so we moved to Winnipeg I mean, and Jim was running a very successful regional agency in Winnipeg for Great West Life, and he wanted me to join him as the agency manager. He was the regional director, and so I was going to manage the advisor side of his agency. We had the wholesale side and we had the advisor side. So I was hired to be the agency manager. So I had about 80 advisors that reported to me, plus I had like 4 or 5 sales managers and a training manager all reporting to me. So it was a fairly significant promotion. And so that's how we wound up in Winnipeg. And because the agency was on the main floor of the corporate head office, you had exposure to a larger operation of the full company. So I mean, you were down in the cafeteria and basically had lunch with the president every day, which is unusual for a lot of advisors and managers. So I had a different exposure to how an insurance company would operate.
And so now you're an agency GM with a big operation. In my recollection, I've never been in management, but my recollection of managers is they spend an awful lot of time on what my friend Andy Maeslis used to call administrivia. Did you get to spend time still with agents and get into the field at that point?
Well, fortunately, yes. I mean, fortunately, I mean, I spent most of my time with my sales managers, and I had some very significant sales managers there and were very successful. And most of them had sales managers, but they also were still running their own practice. We back then the industry was, if you were a highly successful advisor, they'd promote you to management. And so I had some very significant managers there that were doing very well, but they were also very good at supervising and training new advisors. So we were recruiting a lot of new advisors. So yeah, so I spent not significant time in field activities with advisors, because that's what the sales manager would do. But I still got to know the advisors very closely, and still today have a number of them as very close friends.
So now I've got to a point where you've moved from a community of 5,000 to a community of about 30 or 40,000.
Yeah.
To the big city. What's different?
Well, it's really like going home, because I grew up, I had lived in Winnipeg before, and I grew up 30 miles southeast of Winnipeg. So Winnipeg was basically home. And so the lifestyle was not significantly different from what I was used to. I used to work in Winnipeg in a previous life. And so the city was not unfamiliar, but it was still different. I mean, we had 2 young children, and we had to get them to school, which was, I mean, in Morden, the school was across the street, and in Brandon, it was 3 blocks down the road, and now it was 3 miles from the house. So it was different logistically. And fortunately, my wife in Winnipeg was working from home. She was the executive director for the Manitoba Fruit Growers Association. So we had a lot of strawberry farmers that we got to know in the province. So she was at home. I mean, she was working from home, and that was unique. And so it was good. And we had, but I only managed to stay in Winnipeg for 2.5 years. So it wasn't a long stay.
Were the sales any different? Were the agents any different? Was what
they were a lot more sophisticated than and we're just doing substantially more and larger cases. Like, we had some of the very sophisticated advisors in Winnipeg. So I got involved in some of those situations where I could provide whatever whatever advice I could. I mean, some of it was well over my head, but no, it was a very, very strong learning experience for me, because these, like say, some of these advisors were doing significant case, and today would still be significant cases. And so,
You did LUATC for 2 years in your first 2 years.
yes.
What did you do about education after that?
Well, I mean, during my management experience, I mean, I first took my CLU, and most of that I took in Brandon. We had a very good study group in Brandon. We had about 5 people that were doing it at the same time. So we actually met every Saturday morning in a study group, and that's how I got most of my CLU. I finished it off when I got to Winnipeg, and then I took my CHFC, which was in those days was, once you had your CLU, it was another 3 courses, and you could get your CHFC.
That was the Chartered Financial Consultant. It was
Yes.
offered
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
AFA for a
Yes.
brief period.
And it's still there, and in fact, I still use it. That's actually my title that I hold myself out as today, as a Chartered Financial Consultant. I just find that's, well, for me, it just explains a little better what I do. I'm not, I mean, I'm a financial planner, but I'm not a, I mean, I have my CFP, but I don't hold out as a CFP. And because I just want it to be raised a little higher in my mind. So I'm actually strongly encouraging advocates to actually bring back the CHFC as an advanced estate planning designation. I think there's personally a need for it in the industry. I mean, when you look at your CFP and your CLU, you know, what's the advanced designation over and above that so I'm not going to try and get political here, but there's a number of us around the country that are advocating with advocates to bring back and enhance the CHFC as an advanced estate planning designation.
I would certainly support that as well. Everyone who I know who had who obtained the CHFC when it was available thought it was the most advanced designation that they have.
Yes.
That they're able to take.
I just think there's a void in that sort of that career advancement for education piece in my mind, is that once you get to that level, what else is there? And I personally just think that's something that we should be advocating a little stronger on.
So you had this CLU study group. Have you been in other study groups along the way?
Yes. Yeah, I've always been a strong proponent for study groups. I've been in a whole variety of things over the years. As when I left management and was running my own practice, I was actually involved in the Canadian what's it called? It was called CAF, basically the entrepreneurial thing that Jim Burton started, actually, was the, I think it was a CAFE or something, whatever. But I was involved in a study group with that as well over the years as a business owner. And it was a very, very useful thing. There's about 10 other business owners in this group, and a lot of them actually turned out to be clients over the years. But it really helped me with running my own business.
Okay, so how did this go? You were in management, you were in Winnipeg,
Yes.
and now you're in Saskatchewan.
Yes.
What happened in between?
And people ask why.
Views are much better in Saskatchewan.
I know.
You can get up on it and see everything in the world.
You can watch your dog run away for 3 days. No, I was an agency manager back in those days under the organizational chart for Great West Life. There was a regional director, and then an agency manager, and a wholesale manager, which was the brokerage side of the Great West Life business. So if you want the agency manager was more on the retail side, and then you have a wholesale side. So after about 2.5 years, I was given the opportunity to become the regional director for South Saskatchewan. And so I was the senior person in the south part of the province, and was running a reasonable size agency there. Had about six managers, about 10 staff, and about 250 or so advisors that sort of did business with the agency. Some advisors, and most of them are brokers, but we had probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 were sort of considered, back in those days, it was gold key advisors versus brokers, but we had about 250 agency contracts that were running through the agency. And out of the 25 regions across Canada, we were usually in that 10 to 12 spot. So we were, for a small province, we were holding our own.
And my Gold Creek key contract was one of my favorite brokerage contracts ever. It was a great contract.
I wish we still had it today, personally.
So-
I'm a big proponent on levelized compensation, personally.
Me too.
Yeah.
I believe that you build up a book, and then that is what allows you to service the clients for the rest of your career.
I think your interests are aligned with the clients better. Because if you again, we don't want to get political here, because I'm not sure this is a political forum, but if you get all your compensation, or a large part of your compensation the first year, I mean, we say, well, we're making 30-40 year promises. Well, your focus will not necessarily be on 30-40 years if you don't have a financial interest. And I think there should be a penalty for not serving the client properly. But if you have, most of your compensation in the first year or two, where's the penalty?
I've always explained it to clients as, you pay me a retainer every year while you're healthy, so that I'm here when you're not.
Exactly.
Now,
So I was running the office in Regina, and I moved there in the coldest day I ever remember in Regina, which was January 1st of 1993. I arrived. My old Buick LeSabre had a tough time getting from Winnipeg to Regina that day because it was so cold. But so I arrived there in 93, and was running the operation, and say we were doing okay, and so it excuse me. And
one of my favorite
again,
stories about Regina is getting up in the morning, going out and getting in someone's car. You've been sitting there all night and hearing thump, thump, thump as we started forward.
yeah, you got some square wheels. Yeah, no, but it's a great city to live. I mean, there's places like that in Ontario, and there's in every province across the country that are, Regina's about 250,000 or so. But it's a great place to live if you can afford to get out of town 2 or 3 times a year. And that applies to almost every place in the prairies, and I'm sure Ontario as well, and other provinces. But it's a great place to raise a family, and it's still a size of a town where community is important. And I mean, a lot of people, and then I did the same thing there that I've always done. I volunteered for a bunch of stuff, and got to know people. And unfortunately, as the senior person for a large organization, I mean, you get invited to a whole bunch of things because of the position. Also, the other thing you find out when you leave the position, that you only got invited because of the position, not because who you are. So you have a bit of a inferiority complex for a while when you leave the position, but that's the reality.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So now you have this great job, and all of a sudden you decide to go back into individual practice.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, a number of things. As you know, and a lot of people on this call probably, they know that when you're in a corporate organization, the most of the time when you move up, you have to move. And I really wasn't interested in moving again. We had lived in 11 houses in a matter of, you know, 20 years. It was crazy. And so we really didn't want to move. We had a great community. Our kids were there, and I said, well, do I have to? And I was looking around. There was a lot of people in our industry at the time that were selling stuff, but there wasn't necessarily a great amount of creative advice. And so I said, I can make a living here. And I had over the years got to know a lot of accountants and lawyers through the golf club and through community involvement, and so I knew that I could start a business, and I also bought a block of business from Great West Life that I knew was in head office that nobody was really servicing. And a bunch of them happened to be in Saskatchewan. They were an old pension plan from one of the large elevator companies. So I knew there was a bit of a block of business. So I managed to, make an arrangement to buy that block of business. And so I started with, a reasonable size. But I really just wanted to provide good, honest advice. And so that's what I decided to do.
So you built up a good book of business, and then you sold it. How did that come about?
Well, I started with, I don't know, 6 or 7 million, grew it to 70 million over a number of years. But I was looking at my business, and would it be and I had my son working with me at the time, and he wasn't expressing a real interest in necessarily continuing the business if I left. And so I just looked at what is the reality for our family. And I just said, the best thing for us is to take the business, package it properly, and sell it, and me continue on in the business as an advisor rather than as a business owner. And that's what I did. So I sold my business to Beyond Wealth, and then I joined them as an advisor, running my own practice still within their umbrella. And so my responsibility was my office, my phone, and my computer. And then I just had a revenue sharing arrangement with them. And when they brought a piece of business to the door, and so that's worked out really well. That surprisingly is 12 years ago already. And it's worked out okay. And I knew the owner of Beyond Wealth. He used to actually be my boss at Great West Life. So we had a relationship before I sold him the business.
You mentioned golf a couple of times, and I take it you're an avid golfer. And you're a member of a relatively exclusive golf course. And you have a great prospecting method.
Yeah.
Would you like to discuss that with us?
Yeah, I was. In fact, the day I moved to Regina, I joined the Wascana Country Club, and which is it's the only private club in southern Saskatchewan, and it has a 115-year history. There's a lot of, it's one of the few places that people like Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player and Lee Trevino have played over the years. They made pilgrimages to Regina to play the Wascana, and we just had the LPGA tournament there a number of years ago, where Brooke Henderson won her first Canadian tournament was on our course. In fact, I was on the course all week watching her play, And so it was great. But I did the same thing there. I volunteered and I made a very clear decision that I wasn't going to be marketing my business at the club. Because business owners go to the Wascana to get away from the world. Okay, that's their safe place. And so we don't need guys hammering over the head to buy some insurance. And there was guys that did, and they were asked to leave the club because that's not what you do there. And I'm sure that applies to most private clubs. But what I did is I got involved. I volunteered and sat on the board and in fact was the president of the club for 2 years while we did a major, $6 million renovation of the clubhouse. And it's interesting when you have 425 shareholders spending $6 million, you get some interesting comments over the years. So I actually have a blue Peacekeepers hard hat that the board gave me at Christmas one year with the Wascana logo on the front. So we had some, but again, I volunteered. And so people know me. And so one of my largest clients at the time just showed up one day at my office and said, I need to talk to you. But he got to know me from the club. And so, and then the other the one marketing thing I did at the Wascana was I would, because it's a private club, you have difficulty getting on. But so what I would do is I would invite my best client to join me for the afternoon. And then I would have him or her invite their best client to join us. And these people, of course, normally couldn't get on the course. So it wasn't me inviting them, it was my client inviting them to join. Of course, I paid for it, but we talked zero business. But over a cocktail at the end, they would probably ask me normally, like, what do you do? And I had I help business owners find a very successful way to get out of business. That's what I say. Still do today. Well, that catches their attention. Like most people don't talk about getting out of business. Well, it's actually a lot more difficult to get out of business than it is to get into business. But that's all I would say. And, not always, but occasionally one of them would phone. I would never contact them. I didn't ask for their business card, nothing. But some of them would phone.
Well,
But I enjoy golfing. I played back then, I played 50, 60 times a year. And, but we also had a family rule that, we never had a family gathering without a game of golf. That was just a rule we had.
you had some brothers who you played with.
Yes, yeah. So that's how I did my marketing at the club. It was very soft, very easy. But again, I don't think you have the right to ask somebody if you don't give back first. That's just a personal principle, I guess.
A good one. You've had some pretty personal claims in the past little while. Would you like to discuss those?
Yes, and I never expected that I would. I mean, in the last 2 years, I had a brother-in-law that passed away from COVID. I had my older brother passed away from COVID. My younger brother passed away from cancer, and now just recently his wife passed away from cancer. So, I mean, my older brother bought a policy from me 33 years ago. And I always kept it, always paid his premium. And last year I got to deliver the check to his widow, which of course I never expected I would, but I look upon it as a privilege to having able to do that. And so I know his family will be okay financially. And that's what I talk about doing I do some work on legacy planning for different organizations. And like how do you leave a legacy? Well, he left a legacy. He never made a lot of money. He was always comfortable and he always had enough. But the legacy was that he left this policy for his family. And again, it wasn't a large policy, but it was the fact that he took responsibility and left a legacy. And the same thing with my younger brother. My younger brother was the one that invited me into the business 43 years ago on May the 1st. And we did some planning over the years. And a year and a half ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he was declared cancer-free last summer. And by November, he passed away. And I got to deliver a check as well to his wife. And now that was that was difficult to do. But I mean, I've delivered a lot of claim checks over the years, but never to family members before. And now, just in the last few weeks, I've been dealing with his children because his wife passed away. So he left the money to his wife, and now we have passed it on to his children. So he left a legacy for his wife, and now for his family and for his grandkids. And so that's been an interesting process. I never expected to be able to do that, but I've had some interesting conversations with the children now, and how are we going to use the legacy to honor the fact that their parents took responsibility and did it. So it's been an interesting year and a half.
Thank you, Abe. This has been a wonderful discussion, and it adds yet another perspective. Being in the business, there are a variety of ways to do it, and management is one. And people come into the business, move around through different roles, and it's always useful to know that simply being in management doesn't preclude your being an agent. If you're a sales manager, you can continue to sell, and you can come back into the business and hit the ground running with what you've learned. Next week, on June 20th, we'll have Mr. Rob Crowder and Julian Wise will be interviewing him. And the following week, Chris Facey from St. John's, Newfoundland. The week after that, Dave Petrarch will be back with Don Forbes, and then John Hanser and Barry Pascal. Following that, I'll be interviewing Bob Gould, and then Dave Petrarch will be back with Gord Cowan, and then we'll take a break for the August holiday. I thank you very much for joining us for Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series today, and we'll see you again next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time for the 22nd interview in the Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series. Thank you, and have a great weekend.